Hello and welcome back to McClaren Performance. Football is back, Premier League is back, Manchester United are back, and I definitely have some reflections about their first opening game. I hadn't really had a lot of time to think about Manchester United or talk about Manchester United over the pre-season period. Not like I did last season where there was a load of build-up to it. I've only really got this time now. I've had a chance to watch the opening game against Wolves. A lot of interesting things. I think interesting, probably the key word. A lot of good signings made over that window, especially when you consider the change in ownership, or rather the lack of change in ownership that is happening at the moment. Some good moves made by Erik ten Hag. Onana coming in, especially from that game. Seems like a very good keeper, apart from one aspect which we'll probably get into in a little bit, but for the most part a pretty reliable keeper. Mason Mount coming in, obviously a good signing, bolstering up that midfield. Højlund, I believe you pronounce it as well, I'm not 100% on that, but yes, a striker coming in. Somewhat people disappointed about not bringing in a big striker like Harry Kane. However, I would argue that Manchester United of old probably bought in these big names to which they had no impact at all. I do like to see signings that are with a more long-term perspective of a developing player. I don't know a lot about Højlund, but it's evident that he has a lot of things that he needs to work on. Only 20 years old. That's fantastic if he's got that potential that he can grow along with the team, and you're making sort of smart signings like that. I feel like every team has a good transfer window when they bolster up in the spine of the team. The goalkeeper, the midfield, the striker. And that's what Manchester United have done. And you'd like to think that would set them up really well for the opening game of the season, for the season as a whole. I think the one positive from that game is it was a better opening fixture than the opening fixture last season. Let's see what the second game is like, but hopefully it's going to be better than the second game of last season as well. We got the 3 points at the end of the day, and in trying to instill in the team a winning mentality and winning games and do whatever it takes to win games, you can't argue that they, did that. So that is a positive in that sense. But yeah, last season, I've always been a bit optimistic with Manchester United development. It's only Erik ten Hag's season. But coming into the second season of his reign, I think he got to be a bit more critical. However, I won't be massively critical considering it is the opening fixture. It's probably a long way to go and to develop. But you have to be somewhat critical, as Erik ten Hag has now had a season to implement what he wants to implement. He's spent a lot of money, so he hasn't really suffered in that department. And by the looks of it, he's had control of what he wants to do. So yeah, a little bit more critical, I guess, this time. Despite what seemed like quite an optimistic start to the season for Manchester United, I think the fans are really ready to get behind the players with the signs, with the manager, with the season that was very good last season. You'd think the players would be quite relaxed coming into this fixture, but if you were to look on the outside, onto the pitch, onto the performance, it looked like a very nervous performance. I don't know where that's come from, but it's pretty evident, I think, from the inability to keep the ball. It's probably one of those things. And the inability to make the right passes at the right tempo. It seemed a bit rushed sometimes. It seemed a bit this, that. Never seemed like they really got into the game. They weren't really present in the moment, doing the job that they need to do. And I can't imagine they're executing the same way that they've executed in pre-season. And when I talk as a psychologist, for me, that comes down to what I talked about there, not being in the present, not being in the moment, being nervous, being anxious, everything like that, and overthinking the job that you are doing. And it didn't seem like Manchester United, because of that, had any control of the game at all. If a team they were playing against was clinical in their finishing, yes, we would have lost that game. Fortunately, Wolves, despite being what looks like a very fantastic team under Gary O'Neill, weren't able to score at all from any chance, really. So that was really good for us. And with Manchester United, yes, being able to be clinical, not all the time, but in that moment there with Varane, fantastic, sorted the game out, and then kept that 1-0 lead for the rest of the game. And that's what Manchester United needs to do, and that's fantastic. But you do have to be critical in Erik ten Hag and his coaching and his trying to implement what he's trying to implement. You would expect to start seeing that a bit more now. And that performance there seemed a lot like one of those performances last season where the nerves and the anxiety and the trying to understand what's going on with the coaching and trying to understand how we're trying to play was still happening. Kind of seeing that a bit now. That's not the best sign. Speaking of Mason Mount before, saying, a good signing. Within that game itself, don't know if Mason Mount was actually playing. I don't know what he did. I think that whole midfield was somewhat invisible throughout that game. And I think it showed with the amount of times that Wolves just penetrated through and created opportunities. I think it would take someone with a better tactical understanding of the game to explain as to why that was and why that happened. Pretty evident that that was happening, and like I said, there was no control in the game. When you have no control in the game, it's probably because you have no midfield that's really controlling what is going on, and for whatever reason, it really wasn't happening for Manchester United for the whole 90 minutes, really. But the opening fixture of a season is something I'm always wary of anyway, because there's always things you're trying to implement in pre-season. It's very easy to implement those things because there's no pressure in the games that you're implementing them in. But when there is that ounce of pressure that comes into it, things oftentimes kind of go out the window. And you saw that start of last season, Manchester United. I think you're seeing a little bit here as well. I think you have to wait a few games to make that judgment. But don't get me wrong, if those performances are similar within the next 5-10 fixtures, then I definitely would be very critical of what's happening, probably very critical of the players for not executing what is probably a very solid plan from Erik ten Hag. And I think the fans understand as well that he is doing the best job he can possibly do. I only know so much from the outside, but it certainly looks like that. It certainly looks like there is a manager there who is doing some really good stuff. If I had to make a prediction, I think there will be some good performances to come. I think this may be a one-off. There's much more room for development also, and I think it will come. I guess the question is, what is Manchester United's aims this season? Can they really improve on the position they were in last time? I think, yes, they could aim for second place, but there are a lot of good teams, a lot of good funding, a lot of good backing, specifically Manchester City, who are most likely going to take that top spot. And really, Manchester United's aim is to, pretty much similar to last season, win a trophy and get into the top 4, and that's a bit kind of boring to talk about. I think when things change, sadly, is when that ownership changes, and then you can start implementing a real long-term perspective, a real long-term plan of how to reach the heights of where Manchester City are at the moment, and where Manchester United have been in the past. I think the big controversy in the game, the real conversation, the real topic is that penalty incident. Let's not beat around the bush on this one. It is a penalty, and VAR got that wrong. The referee got that wrong. I believe the referee and the people in VAR are now banned, I think, from at least next week. It's a shame that these conversations come back to refereeing again and not about the actual game itself. Wolves should get a penalty. It should most likely be 1-1. That would probably be a score that probably really well reflected the performances of both teams, but just so happened that Manchester United get away with that, win the game, and Wolves in a tough position really where they deserve the penalty. I don't know why that's not given. I talked about this before. I think when people in VAR, when they have time to think and make a judgment, I think that's probably where more errors come from, whereas a referee that is instinctively making a decision gets it right more often than not. And that's my little theory on it, but still not good enough. You'd think with VAR you'd have at least one mistake maybe a season, but not to start the season and then have one major one happen straight away. I don't think that's right. I don't know what they're going to do about it. They can't just keep kicking out referees who make those decisions and then get new ones in who are probably going to make those wrong decisions again and kick them out again. I don't know what the solution is. Referees, again, a really boring and interesting topic at the same time because of how, for the most part, they seem really incompetent. But yeah, back to Manchester United. To be honest, I think this is a big season for Erik ten Hag. If you look at the average length of Premier League managers, this is kind of the time where things happen, where people have that season, and then coming into this, there's really not that many excuses as to why you wouldn't be performing at such a high level. And I think that's where people are going to be more critical of Erik ten Hag, whereas before, new manager, that's fantastic, love everything that he does. And this season is going to be a bit more critical, especially when I think inevitably there will be those performances like there were last season where players just crumble for whatever reason. But in that sense, yeah, it is a big season for Erik ten Hag, and if it's a hurdle he gets over, then he has a good few years, I think, at Manchester United doing what he's doing. But this second season, I think, is massive for him. But yeah, they are my thoughts on Manchester United. I haven't talked about them a lot because I was more interested in them at the start when things were changing, developing. There was a lot of psychology towards that. I think they get into a bit of a boring point now, but games like this are interesting, and I'm sure more interesting things will happen in the future as well, knowing Manchester United and everything that goes on there. So yeah, I want to talk about that as much as possible. What are your thoughts on the game of Manchester United? Are you frustrated with Erik ten Hag not implementing yet what you think is his way of playing and what you think he should be doing at the moment? Are you still being patient with it? I'm not entirely sure myself, obviously I'm a bit biased. Thank you for watching and listening, and I'll see you again next week.